This episode of Southeast Iowa Today is brought to you by Griner Auto Body of Washington, Iowa, using state-of-the-art techniques and decades of experience to get your car back on the road after an accident. Car Doctor of Washington, Iowa. No matter who Frankensteined it, they can fix it, clean it, and customize it. McDonald Boneyard of Keota, Iowa, for all your farm equipment and auto recycling needs. For great food, it's your choice. Your Choice Family Restaurant of Wayland, Iowa. Open Tuesday through Sunday. Come to our cruise-ins this summer on the second Tuesday of the month, June through September. Girling Repair of Winfield, Iowa. If your mower is dead, call Fred, your Husqvarna, Aaron's, and Gravely dealer. Fred also fixes and sells snowblowers. B&B Propane and the family of Jet Stops. Dutch Market and Coffee Talk of Washington, Iowa. Dutch Market can handle all of your grocery needs. They even have a conference room you can use for free. Coffee Talk's drive-thru is open and ready to serve you coffee, energy drinks, sandwiches, baked goods, and ice cream. They all present you the award-winning Southeast Iowa Today. Here's the author of Christie's Journey, The Beat Goes On, and your host, John Bain.
Thank you, announcer Cody Roy of NewEnglandDukes.com for your golden pipes and wonderful introduction. Today, I am in one of the study rooms at the Mount Pleasant Public Library in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. I am visiting with Bryan Messer, who is a citizen of Henry County, Iowa, and we're going to talk the current wind turbine zoning situation and all kinds of stuff. So let's get right to it. Bryan, welcome to the podcast. You, sir, are a Henry County citizen. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I grew up here in Henry County, lived on a family farm north of Mount Pleasant, graduated from here, left for a while through college and career, and then was able to come back here in 2016.
Awesome. And I've seen you at several of the wind turbine meetings and planning and zoning meetings and such, and we've talked off camera in the past. And today, after we've had the third public hearing of the zoning from the Board of Supervisors, we are meeting on Tuesday, May 6th, and we're at the Mount Pleasant Public Library. And
formerly the high school.
Formerly the high school. And you and I, we have a chance today to talk, and you have a differing opinion that I've had from others that I've interviewed in the past. So kind of tell me where you are on all this.
Well, it's an interesting issue for sure. I look at it as an issue of coming from a point of let's have a standard that affects everything across the line rather than trying to signal out one or two, I say organizations, companies or industries that would potentially be stopped. And so that's kind of where I was just like, why are we not fair across the board? So that's piqued my interest in this significantly. Yes, I was approached by the wind company and my father, who's the current landowner. We're both landowners. Anyway, it's one of those things where we were both approached and we looked at it significantly for long periods of time, had a lawyer review, and yes, we did sign our land up into this wind project, thinking that it would be good not only for us, but also for Henry County at that time. So,
what would be the benefits in your research for Henry County?
There's quite a few. If you look at House File 718, which was an Iowa bill, kind of limiting property taxes and what they can do, counties can do so that they don't keep hiking up property taxes on people and passing that burden along to the rural taxpayers. They are going to significantly limit the percentage of growth that a county can claim and therefore raise taxes for. So this particular thing, if we raised approximately $2 million in tax revenue per year from this, I think the way I understand it is that some of that money will definitely go to the county for them to spend however they want. The rest would also go to the county, but that would come off of our property taxes. So every citizen that pays property taxes will pay less property taxes. Now, that takes a while, right? It takes a while for the taxes to ramp up to full taxes. And to the exact extent that it lowers taxes, whether it's $50, $100, $200, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I think that that's a key that it could help everybody. Now, from a personal standpoint, there are a lot of farmers, and I don't farm. We rent our land out now because, well, there's a lot of reasons, but anyway, that's what we do. But a lot of farmers need to have some type of stable income, and I think this is a great opportunity to provide a stable income for up to 35 years or so. And to deny that, I think, is very interesting. So that's how it'd be good for personal people. And then one of the articles I read that actually looked at farmers from Iowa, Missouri, and Ohio, I think, and I think it was actually from Keokuk County, was part of the Iowa. They did surveys and found that the number one stressor for all farmers are finances. And that was 45, and the next one was 22, and that was weather. So I found it interesting that the number one stressor is finances, and yet here's a potential stable income to people that now, so that's obviously a reason. And we have land to make a living and to make money. That's why anyone farms, I would say.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'd say that stressor of financial stressor would probably be at the top of most industries or most businesses, I would think.
I agree, but I actually was shocked to see it more than double weather. I remember back when we did farm, and Dad would be up all night pacing around when there was a storm, because obviously a storm can come through and wreak havoc on your crops. And if I'm being honest, I don't know whether we had crop insurance or not. I don't think that we did, but I can't say that for sure. And that was obviously a big thing. So I was shocked to see that it was so much more. And then I've seen other articles where it talks about how 2023 and 2024 was a very down year for commodities prices and put a lot of stress on farmers. I think it's fascinating to know that the number of small farms is decreasing by the thousands every year, and it's becoming more large farming, or you could say industrial farming. Yeah. So using very large industrial equipment to do so.
It definitely. I'm 58 years old, and the family farm setup has definitely does not resemble what it did when I was a child growing up in the 1970s. That's for sure.
I would say anecdotally, I mean, I grew up on a farm of 200 acres, and you could partially make a living off of that to some degree up to a certain years. And I don't know. I'm sure there was, but I don't remember anybody that farmed over 1,000 acres when I was 5 years old. But now I know more people that farm over 1,000 than I know farm less than 1,000. I think that's interesting. Now, I don't know the stats for Henry County. That could be way off, but it's just anecdotally, that's what I've seen. I think that's an interesting change.
I know my grandfather, who farmed in Washington County, southern Washington County. I can remember when I was in high school, and I graduated in 1984. And I remember when I was in sophomore or junior, I remember saying to him, "Hey, Grandpa, maybe I should go into the farming business with you." And he says, Unless you got 600 acres or more, you shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, you could come up with a niche thing that you might make work, but if you wanted to do traditional corn and soybeans, I think it would be pretty difficult. I don't even know if it'd be possible if you were starting from scratch. Like if you had to buy land, buy equipment, I don't even know if it's possible. It might be, but.
And like I said, that was in the early 1980s when that conversation took place.
Right, and I thought it was fascinating. I read that the average age of the farmer is 58, and 40% of them are 65 and older. So I see that in our own county. I see that there's a lot of farmers and not a lot of younger people taking that up that I see, but. Once again, who knows exactly what's going on in Henry County specifically, but those are national stats.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I recall that when you've spoken to public hearings, you've mentioned the CSR, the corn suitability rating, and the fact that on this zoning that is out there, I think the level is 65 or more or higher. They're recommending not to put the wind turbines on. Do I have that right?
Well, my understanding is that if 20% or more of your parcel is 65 or above, so that could be wrong, but that's my understanding. So if that is in fact true,
And
that's
100 is the greatest
right
for the
right.
measurement.
And a lot of Henry County is graded at better than 65, especially northern Henry County, which is where this wind farm is proposed to be. But I think it's interesting because of that rating, 65, just 20%. So you could have 80% of your parcel be terrible, like 50, right? But let's say you have 20% is rated at 65, then that would make that whole land ineligible for this. I kind of find that very interesting, but I think it's ultimately just designed to kill the project, because I think there's very little places at all that would even qualify for that. But the part that I have a problem with is go ahead and make that ordinance, that's fine, but make it for everything, right? And that's what we're not doing, because I know there's CRP land that is easily 65 or above that is in CRP. Okay, so are we going to try to ban that? And some would say, well, you can't, that's federal. Oh, well, I think the county board of supervisors have shown that they can do whatever they want until they can't, and then they're protected by the county. So the way I see that is they just did what was about 3 weeks ago at a public meeting. They approved a new, I think south of town, for a new development for 3 houses that were going to take land out of production for these houses, or this housing development. How many acres, I don't remember exactly, but my point is, nobody asked what the CSR level rating was of that land that they're taking out of production.
Was that already something that was part of a previous plan?
I don't know.
Okay.
I just thought it was fascinating that no one even brought that up. So it's like, where do we want to draw the line? And are we going to say that you can't do anything in the county, or is it okay if we say, well, if it's a living quarters, you can do it? If it's a building that you say is for housing animals or housing tractors, then it's okay. If it's a building to house trucks that you haul grain in, then it's okay. I mean, where do we want to draw the line? I just feel like if we're going to hold the standard, then let's hold the standard.
Well, let's get back to your CRP point for a moment, because I've had experience as a former landowner in Washington County, and our farm put tillable land into CRP and made wetlands. And the difference that I believe to be between doing that and putting a wind turbine on the land is the fact that CRP, going, tillable land into wetlands or that sort of thing, does not ruin its ability to come back out of CRP at some point and be tillable land again and produce corn or beans.
Well, I would say you're right. I don't think that does, but I would say wind turbines don't either.
Well, that's where people are concerned now, where they're saying the oil that comes out of the generator up top, or the like they've had in some of the counties where these blades have been knocked off with tornadoes and splintered the fiberglass throughout. Definitely can't use it to graze cattle on and that sort of thing if they had a crop around the turbines. So there are some differences between the CRP and that.
Well, to some degree, I follow what you're saying. Assuming a catastrophic event is what you're assuming in that case. But as far as taking that out, I know that some people have said that you shouldn't have this concrete base left in the land, which any person who signed that knows that, and that should be my land. That should be my right to know whether I want to leave that concrete base in there. Perhaps I have some plans 35 years in the future, who knows? But let's say me or a family, whatever, would want to build something there that would, now we've got a strong base. And if not, okay, it's going to be 4 feet deep. I think they're proposing deeper, but 4 feet deep. I did the math on that. If you did that and you got half of your crop harvest over the top of that, you would lose about $4 a year in corn crop. Okay, because maybe the roots don't go 8 feet deep like they would in other places. So really $4 a year for losing crop, maybe that's not that big of a deal. And that's every other year. I mean, so it'd be $8 total. That makes sense. So 1 year 8, next year you do soybeans potentially. So that to me seems kind of moot. As far as the fiberglass and the catastrophic, I think with regards to the grazing, it's a valid point, but where do we want to draw the line on what else is potentially thrown across the county through a catastrophic event? right? Should we mandate how buildings are built and what they can and can't have in it? What if any building, and I don't know if there are, but what if there are any buildings that still have asbestos in it? Should we mandate that they absolutely take that out in case a catastrophic event comes by and spreads it across our land, making it inert? I don't know. I mean, I know that we
So
don't build that now.
How far do we
but-
go? Yeah.
Right.
And I say most of the asbestos,
challenge.
like on a farmhouse or something like that, is pretty much already done its damage.
I agree, and no one's building new stuff.
Right.
I understand that. I mean, that's a valid point. But so I don't know about that as far as you can't return it to that. But if assuming there's no catastrophic event, which there really aren't that many. I understand that when there are, you get a lot of headlines. Just like if you look at plane flights, you see every plane crash that there is.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, if you look at the statistics, it's by far the safest form of travel, more than trains, cars, anything. It's by far. And yet, if you go by what you hear in the media, it sounds like it's by far and away the worst.
Yeah.
And it really isn't. So, I don't have all the official stats and all that, but I do know that there are catastrophic events that occur that happen, just like other things catch on fire and spread across fields and spread across other people's property. So you mentioned the oil. I do want to mention that because then once again, where do you want to draw the line on that? Because potentially some of the older models do, and I'd say maybe some of the new ones do, but they're designed a lot better to prevent that. But let's say that does happen. That would happen on the landowner's land. What do we do about preventing tractors from leaking oil or hydraulic fluid all over the land or the roads?
Mm-hmm.
Because that happens. I mean, I know we had tractors that did it way back in the day.
Sure.
I don't think we need to go crazy with this, but if we're going to hold one-to-one standard, let's hold it everything.
I'll tell you. I mean, it's quite the rabbit hole we start going down. You had mentioned some of those other businesses that are currently in place in Henry County. Are there particular types of businesses that, in your opinion, aren't living up to a code that they should be, or their code should be changed?
No, not necessarily. I think a lot of people that probably have seen me speak probably think that I'm some big green energy thumper, and I'm not. I kind of believe in the principles, I would say, of the Republican platform, and so that's where I'm coming from. When it comes to businesses, you can make arguments against a lot of things. I'm not necessarily doing that. I just want to point out, let's hold things to the same standard. Like, I think it's fascinating if we look at Walmart, for example. Walmart is on land that my grandfather and dad used to rent and farm, and now it's Walmart. And Walmart distribution, I believe we get approximately $500,000 a year in tax revenue to the county. So that has changed. We've taken up good farm ground to put Walmart in to bring in business and tax revenue and jobs to this area, keeping Mount Pleasant somewhat viable, right? So that occurs all the time. And look at the glow from the light that occurs. If you see all the security lights and stuff from the town, when I was a kid, you didn't hardly see any of that. Now it's a nice glow from the town. Is that pollution?
It is. It's called light pollution.
It is. There is a thing, and I know there's places where they have like dark parts of the country where they can observe the skies. I think Utah might be one of. There's a space out there where they do that. I could be wrong, but anyway, I don't worry about that. But my point is if you want to perceive that, you could perceive, oh, this is light pollution. This is breaking up my harmony and my quality of life out here in the countryside. That should have never happened. Well, I'm not saying that, but I just think it's interesting.
Yeah, it definitely is interesting.
Yeah, so I just feel like we're trying to hold this industry, and to some degree this company, but this industry, to standards we don't hold anything else to. You know, we're holding them to a standard of they have to put money into an escrow account so that if anybody files a complaint and then the county or someone investigates that, all of that money comes out of the escrow account. And some would say, well, that's great. Well, what if they're not found to be guilty and it's just frivolous complaints coming in? It's still money coming out of their pocket. I'm like, what other company do we provide an escrow account so that if they ever get investigated, that they have to pay for their own investigation? Or a person, you get accused of a crime, we don't make you pay for the own investigation against yourself.
Well,
right?
Right,
So,
that's true. But one of the things that I I'm sure someone is yelling right now as they're
Oh,
watching
sure.
this saying, ask him this, John, ask him
Sure,
this,
sure,
what
sure.
about this?
Absolutely.
But I want you to finish making your point. I don't
Yeah, no,
interrupt
ask me about
people.
it, yeah.
But one of the things that people are concerned about, and they've shown lots of examples. Now, you mentioned, there's been lots of examples of plane issues, but yet it's still the safest way to travel. But they've got a lot of documentation of issues with these wind turbines, with everything from fires to health issues and everything else. And then on top of that, these companies that are owning these wind turbines, and not in every case, but in a lot of cases, and potentially here in Henry County with RWE, they're multinational companies. And a lot of people who sit back and look at this from afar say, this sure looks like a land grab of United States land, and taking it out of the ability to farm and to grow product for 35 to 50 years, in some counties 60 years. They basically are controlling our land at that point, because you as a landowner, when you sign that lease, correct me if I'm wrong, there's probably not very much wiggle room to get out of it once you're in it.
I think that could very well be accurate. You raised a whole lot of points that I wanted to talk about with that, but it's kind of like a multinational corporation. If I had my druthers, I'd love to have it be an American based, but what it isn't. And I look at where are we at, even in Henry County, how many corporations do we have that we give money to that leaves the United States? We have Continental, that's German owned. I think Southeast Iowa is the per capita, the number one consumer of Busch Light in the country, and yet Budweiser's not owned by Americans. It's owned by a Belgian and a Brazilian company. Coors is not owned by an American. Miller Lite's not owned by an American anymore. So a lot of money goes out there. How many cars do people buy and look at that either one are not even owned by an American manufacturer or even made in America? All that money's leaving. And then I look at what are we producing with the land? You talked about taking land out of production. So on average, maybe roughly 2 acres per turbine. Okay, I mean, there's got to be a little bit of road to it. Depends on where it would be situated on the land, so on. So if I took 2 acres out of production, and it's for 35 years on the base, which would be 70 acres over the course, and it might go a little bit longer, but that'd be the course. And currently my father and I have 72.5 tillable acres that we rent out. So what if I decided, for whatever reason, I just decide not to rent out that land for a year? Would that be a fine? If I decide to take that out of production, and then if I think about supply and demand, if I grow less on my land, then what you grow on yours should become more valuable. So you should make more money if I want to take stuff out of production. So I find that interesting. And I find, what do we grow with regards to corn? 40 to 45% of our corn goes to ethanol. 40 to 45% goes to feeding animals. 10% goes to high fructose corn syrup. 5% goes to feeding people. Okay, now what if we export that? You'd say that's good, it brings in money, but then is it going to feed America? Are we selling out America? I don't think so. I'm not arguing that, but you could look at things from a multiple different ways. I think the ethanol industry is an interesting one, because it is mandated by the government that certain amount of fuel has ethanol in it. It's not mandated that you buy it at the fuel pump, but it's mandated that a certain amount of fuel that has it in it. And of course, for it to compete price-wise, it's subsidized. So it's heavily subsidized, and people don't want subsidies on the wind turbines. I'm all for it. Take away subsidies from wind turbines, take them away from solar, but then take them away from everything. Take them away from the oil and gas industry, take them away from geothermal, coal, nuclear. They all have it. And if you want to talk subsidies, Henry County gets approximately $12 million a year in farm subsidies, mostly through crop insurance and CRP. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not arguing against that. I'm just saying these are subsidies that we already accept and like and want. But then when we want to provide a fair platform for any energy company to compete, then we don't want it. We want to take those subsidies away. I think it's fascinating that Elon Musk, even in an interview one time, they were going to subsidize charging stations across the country. And he's like, I don't want that. Let the free market decide it. Let it go. But he also said, but then take away all the other subsidies, which that's going to hit a lot of people hard.
Which then he gets to have his cake and eat it too, because he'll get the subsidy even though he doesn't think he needs it.
In what way?
Because they'll still, he's a businessman as well, and I like what he's been doing with Doge, but
Right.
he's going to follow the rules of the game, and whatever the rules of the game are, that's how he's going to play, and he's going to figure out a way to win, and that's what successful business people do.
Right.
And so he's saying right up front, take out the subsidies, but take them away from everybody else too.
Right.
But they're not going to take them away from everybody else, which means he will end up with them.
Right.
That's my point.
But his point that he's making is just provide a fair platform. Like we as Republicans want to have a fair platform, and that's in the Republican platform, like a free economic society. So if the government sits there and says, now we don't, what if they did the opposite? What if they subsidized solar and wind and took away subsidies from everything else? I wouldn't advocate for that.
Right.
Like that's not a fair environment to everything else. Like just provide a fair environment. So, and ultimately, that's not something that we can control at the county level. That's state and federal level. So, that's kind of a moot point, but I understand why people are arguing against it and saying that it's contributing to the national debt. And like, well, you can make an argument on a lot of subsidies because it's amazing how much the government does subsidize in general. And I think it's interesting that Mr. Trump, or President Trump really argues on deregulation of the energy sector and opening it up. Now, I know he's canceled the offshore wind stuff that I'm aware of, and he's not necessarily a big fan, but in his first 4 years, he didn't do anything to stop at least onshore development, because I think, this is just me thinking, that we need all kinds of energy. I mean, flat out, we just need energy. I mean, with all I think the predictions are that just data centers alone by 2026 are going to take up 6% of the national electricity production.
Yeah. The whole AI thing is
AI, cryptocurrency, and data centers, and that's why a lot of they're saying that our needs are going to more than double by 2030. So, do we need electricity? I would say yes, and the more of it we have, the less that it'll cost the people. If we have less production of energy, then it's going to cost people more. Now, I understand people are going to argue, well, let's burn more coal. Okay, I mean, I'm not saying turn things down. We need all energy.
Well, what would really help this whole scenario, everything you described, I mean, yeah, I understand where you're coming from and it makes sense, and I don't know if this is even possible, what I'm going to say next, but if there was a way to cut through all the crap from every industry there is, and the science that goes with things, I mean, most scientists are funded by some company or some group looking for a way to make things, their idea or their plan work. And if we would have an honest broker, and I mean, the only way I can tell, I think the only way we would ever have that is through Jesus Christ, and because
that would be true, yes.
Yeah, because the rest of us are flawed. And my point is, if we knew for a fact, go back to Al Gore, who told us back in the 90s, well, if we listened to Al Gore, you and I wouldn't be alive today. Our planet was doomed. And we can argue back and forth what was done to save our planet, or if our planet was actually in crisis. And when he made his documentary and showed polar bears out on floating and then had no glaciers left, but then if you zoom out, there's a big glacier behind them they can get to and swim to. I mean, there's all this kind of stuff, and it happens both ways. It happens on the other side of all of these issues. How do we get honest brokers so that when we read the research, you've got stacks of stuff around you? Folks from Henry County Watchmen have stacks of stuff around them. All of it seems legit.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get an honest broker that says that's crap, that's crap, that's wrong,
Right.
that's real? I mean, that's what the American citizen is faced with every day. And then depending on what line of media they watch,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, CNN, Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson,
Correct.
John Bain, they're getting something different from everybody.
It's a difficult scenario. It's a difficult question. I think that the best way to look at it, and this is, I come at it from a little bit of a different standpoint because I've actually taken 2 graduate level courses on doing research on humans or research in general. So yes, it could be animal studies, but basically doing health type research on that, and have conducted at least one study with a group of people that did that. So how do you try to eliminate bias? Because honestly, that's the number one threat to research. There's several threats, but that's the number one, and it's a very difficult thing to do. However, like here's an example, and I don't know whether you want to put that on there or not, but
We can.
But you can at least see there's a pyramid of scientific evidence.
Okay.
I don't know if you've gotten that yet.
Yep, we're zooming in.
Okay, and I'll give you another one in a little bit. But you look at the top. Oh, I had them buried. If you look at the top, it talks about meta-analysis, systematic review, critical appraised resources, and then randomized control. It's a pyramid of strength, and the top is the highest strength. So a meta-analysis, right, is a complete analysis of basically all the literature on it, trying to come up with an informed view based on all of that. And that's the strongest evidence. However, even that can be manipulated, because if I'm doing an analysis of a bunch of bad articles, that doesn't necessarily make it good. But the best one, and this is kind of where I like this one better.
Okay.
So the pyramid of scientific evidence.
Okay.
And like if you look there, it's meta-analysis of randomized controlled studies, and then meta-analysis of non-randomized control before or after studies, and then right below that, in the high level of evidence, it's the randomized controlled study. So that's where you try to eliminate bias, is when you do a double-blind randomized controlled studies. And what that is that saying that I want to determine, one that we did was TENS, was transcutaneous electrical neurostimulation, whether that has an impact on what it says it does on the human body. And so we had subjects that signed up for the exam, and they were going to either get the real treatment or a false treatment that was nothing. They didn't know. They didn't know what they were getting. And then also, we didn't know what they were getting. So as if I'm putting that on them, and I turn them on, I'm giving the instructions and all that, I'd had no idea. And then it's not until after you get done with everything and you have the data, and then you're like, oh, well, Group A was the real group, and Group B was not. And then you analyze that, and you see, okay, did the group that actually received the treatment perceive a benefit more than the people that didn't? Right? That'd be the placebo effect. And that's where you come into that. So then you have these double-blind studies, right? There's some like here, the effects of ultrasound and negative expectations to adverse pathological symptoms from wind farms. This supports the nocebo effect hypothesis. So this is a double-blinded, randomized study that shows that if people think they're going to be exposed to harmful effects, they're going to feel like they're having harmful effects. If they think they're going to have no harmful effects, they don't have harmful effects. It's kind of fascinating, I think. And there's several of them, but one specifically that's been the hot topic. Here's one that specifically talks about how there's no long-term, between long-term exposure to wind turbine noise and the risk of stroke. There's no evidence to support risk of stroke.
And who is that from?
It's a Danish, the American Heart Association, and it was written in 2019.
Well, speaking of the Danish,
but I do want to show one more before you move on. This one specifically, right? Simulated wind turbine noise, the 2023 study showing that there's no issues with that. It's a double-blind, randomized.
Who's that from?
So, you can take a look at it, but
let's just zoom in on it.
It's just one. Now, is this study perfect? Of course it isn't. None of them are perfect, but it gives you an example. It's from the Environmental Health Perspectives, I guess, March of 2023. But at least just gives you an idea of some of the research that's going on that supports that basically what I see as annoyance is the number one thing. They can show like if there's a certain level of annoyance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the Ohio Public Board of Health basically puts in its thing, is that there is a certain annoyance factor. But my question is, where do you want to draw the line on that? Because I can appreciate that, but and I'm not going to call out anything, but I want to just bring it as an example because I think most people are aware of it. There's signs that are on the road west of town here on 34 that are, I think, like Hillary for prison. I'm making no comments on the sign or whatever, but I support the right of that person to have a sign on his land. But
I think
does that annoy people though? I don't know. It might.
I think they also used to have in that same place,
Mhm.
F. Joe Biden.
I think it still do.
Yeah.
But whether you agree with that or disagree with that, I'm not making that claim, and I don't fault that person in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
I support their right to have a sign, but does it annoy people? I'm guessing it does. I don't know though. So it's kind of fascinating. Is where do we want to legislate annoyance?
Yeah. Well, good point.
Right?
I mean, and that's a freedom of speech, basically, is where that would fall under on that
To some degree, right?
To some degree, but also, when it comes to freedom of speech, people have the right to respond to that speech, and they also have the right to ignore
Absolutely.
that speech. So, but one of the things that came up when you're talking about the different places this research comes from, in Europe, they just had a issue with power in Spain here a few days ago. Germany, where RWE, at least part of their company is from, they're not using near the wind turbines that you would expect them to. Or I've even heard that they're using less now, and they're having trouble even heating and providing electric or power to.
Why? Do you know why?
That's what I'm asking your opinion on.
I mean, well, we had the Ukraine war, and a lot of their energy supply was cut off. So they've got to scramble to find energy, right? So that's one of the reasons why I think they've increased their coal production, is for that reason.
Okay.
Now, I don't know. I don't claim to know everything about that. And in regards to the Spain issue, I am aware of it, but I haven't followed the exact what they found yet regarding that. But once again, this is coming back to: am I arguing for wind or for solar? I'm not.
You're just arguing for the right to do what you want.
I'm arguing for what's fair, and that's really what comes down to. And then when people talk about, okay, we can scrap the Republican platform because this is a health concern. Well, I've got family that lives on the farm that a turbine would be next to, and I'm not going to put them in peril. So this is one reason why it took me months and months before I signed anything, because I wanted to do the research, and the research for my liking from the stuff that I could find that wasn't biased. And that's one thing I said in one of the public hearings, is the one thing I've learned is there's a lot of bad research out there. Some that are in favor of it too. There's some that's like, oh, this is the greatest thing, next to whatever. But there's also a lot of bad stuff that's against it. And so I feel like I've got a little bit more understanding than the average person walking on the street of what critically to look at to try and find bias. So to get back to Germany, yeah, I'm not saying that wind and solar is perfect, and it's not necessarily the answer to everything, but it's something that we need to explore, and we need all forms of energy. I'm not advocating that we close coal plants, but you see where I'm coming from? That's more where I'm coming from. I'm not this big thumper on green energy.
Right.
I just think we need energy.
And you're also, it sounds like you're someone that's big on the rights to your own property to do what you want to do on your land. Yeah,
I think it's funny. Like, this is a great book for anyone who actually wants to read it. But this is an interesting book that talks about liberties and a lot of how liberty was founded in this country and what it meant. And I thought it was fascinating that a lot of liberties back when we were trying to get away from Britain was based on property rights and saying that not necessarily land, but property, for you to be able to make a living how you see fit. Right? A lot of liberties were tied to that. And I find that interesting because a lot of times liberty is the definition, which I have somewhere in all this mess, is talking about freedom from government control. That doesn't mean that you can be allowed to do whatever you want. I mean, I can't have a toxic dump on your land, right? Or you have, known chemicals to cause problems, although you could argue that we do that anyway. But I just think that that's something to be aware of when it comes to all these rights, that I think property rights to make a living, and that's another thing. It talks about we don't rely on the benevolence of others. That's in the platform. Well, that means you don't want to rely on the government to make your living for you. I want to make it myself. Well, here's an opportunity. Here's an opportunity to provide a stable income, and I think that that's a legitimate thought process, regardless of the stressors that we talked about earlier. Why wouldn't we at least consider that as being legitimate? And then when it talks about in the platform of providing a free economic society, right? So we want to encourage capitalism, and we want to encourage the freedom to do this. And it also talks specifically about deregulation. And it says federal, state, and local. But that's not what we're doing here. This ordinance has increased the regulations tenfold. And if we look at the ordinance that was in place in 2022, that 2 of the 3 current board members passed, I don't know where we're just blowing, we're ordinancing crazy. And so where do we want to draw the line? Where are we're giving them power, and that's the biggest threat to liberty, is to the citizens providing the government the power to control them. And that's what we're doing. We're providing them the power to drastically change this. Where are they going to draw the line? I'll mention a couple of things that I think are probably ridiculous, but I would have thought this was. And that is, what if they want to pass an ordinance that says you have to have your tractors and combines go through an inspection process every year in order to get a permit, so that you're not leaking oil and hydraulic fluid all over the land? Well, I'm not saying I want that at all, but could they do it? Sure, until someone decides that they can't, and then the county would defend them, right? They could make an ordinance that you can't do all sorts of things. What if we talked, shadow flicker is a great example, right? The ordinance in the new ordinance says no shadow shall be on anyone's property anywhere at any time. So now we're afraid of shadow, but are we gonna mandate spraying? So we spray insecticide, herbicide, pesticide all over our land. Anything that ends with the word side, like homicide, means to kill. So we're spraying poison on our land. I understand the reason for it, and I get it, right? But I've been sprayed on by airplanes twice in my lifetime, mostly detasseling, right? They were doing other fields, and they keep going, and the spray doesn't come off in time. I've been sprayed just recently by a few years ago. One of the neighboring people, it was 17-mile-an-hour wind at that time, and I know why they were doing it, because the weather was such that they couldn't get out and spray very much, and finally there was an opening. But it was 17-mile-an-hour winds. I had to go inside because I was physically getting spray on me. Wow. So I'm thinking, are we going to ordinance that? We should say, well, you can't spray unless there's 0 wind, or you can't do any aerial spraying, whether it's a drone or a plane. Once again, I'm not advocating for that, but it's like, where do we want to draw the line on what we're willing to give the power of the Board of Supervisors? That's my concern, and I think we're walking down a slippery slope here. And already we're in the meetings, we've talked about, the only thing that's been brought up, I thought was fascinating, is wind. We have to have an ordinance for wind, and we have to have an ordinance for solar coming next. And then today it was just brought up, we have to have an ordinance for battery storage. Okay, all potentially reasonable, but no mention of any other ordinance. No mention of oil well drilling, natural gas well drilling. What if someone wants to build a coal plant in Henry County? No mention of any of that. So are we gonna have an ordinance for that, or is it really basically political, and we're hammering out the energy forms that tend to be from the Democrat Party? I don't know.
Or maybe it's just that there's human beings that are trying to live with whatever this new thing is, and you can't do everything at once.
Right, and I follow what you're saying. Like, we can't do an ordinance for all of it at once, but I just find it funny that it's never been mentioned. The only thing that's been mentioned are the things that are technically green energy, which leads me to the political. I mean, I know that as a general rule, green energy is associated with the Democratic Party. And Henry County voted, I don't know this last election, but the prior election was 68% Republican. So do I think in the last 8 years, we've been a pretty hyper-polarized political country.
Oh, I can't argue with
that. So
that.
to deny that this has any political basis, I think would be very interesting. But that aside,
but there's been so much fraud and abuse in the green energy industry over those years. I can't name off 5 or 6 off the top of my head, and I didn't even put notes in it about it. But there has been, and the folks that are in the national spotlight in the Democratic Party right now are some of the most unpopular people to the majority of voters.
Yes.
Otherwise, the election would have went the other way.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
And so, yeah, there's going to be some of that, but you also, in life, how's that go? Victory goes, the spoils. How's that? I forget that phrase.
I think the spoils go to the victor. Or
something like along those lines, and that's kind of where we're at right now too. Now, Nick Brown from RWE representative, it's been in the spotlight more than the others that first started 15 months ago. At the, I think it was the first public hearing a few weeks back, he mentioned with the setbacks that are put on this zoning, the 3,280 feet, I think it is, pretty much will stop any small farmer from being involved.
I think it would stop anybody because it says from property line.
Okay.
So it's 3,200, not from a dwelling, which is, I think, the current. It's something like 2 or 3 times. I don't know the exact. I should, but I don't. 2 or 3 times the height from a dwelling and 1 point whatever from property line. So I think that 3,280 feet, which is a kilometer, right? So it's definitely not a mile, but I mean it's over half of a mile. What is a section, right? It's 3,200 acres, or I'm sorry, 640 acres, and then you have we have the farmers to market grid, which is how Iowa was designed, I think, at one point in time with the gravel road system. It's on a mile grid. So if I owned a mile by mile section, but I didn't own the land around that, I couldn't even put it in the middle of my land because it would be within 3,280 feet of a property line. It doesn't matter if there's any houses or anything anywhere near it. You know, and then some would say, well, it should be any structure. What if I put a gazebo out there? And it's like, well, same thing. We don't ordinance against, we're talking about sound too, right? So that's the big thing with health. The current wind turbines are roughly about 105 to 110 decibels, depending. I mean, that's a rough. But so are grain bin dryers. Grain bin dryers are the same decibel level. And I would ask, now, granted, they don't run 12 months out of the year, but they definitely run for 2 or 3 months out of the year. And I would say that if there's such a big problem with this, how come we've not had any significant cases running to the hospital after grain bin dryers have been put on when they're turned on in the fall? Because if you look across the county, I would guess, this is just a guess, at least 75% of them are within 300 feet of a house or potentially from a cattle lot or a pig lot or something like that. And yet, do we have massive health problems from that? And they put out regular sound of over 100 decibels, and it's way louder than the decibels they want in this ordinance to those houses. It's not even close. And it puts out infrasound that people are worried about. It puts out electromagnetic frequencies that people are worried about. It's like, so it puts out all these things that we have a few hundred feet from a house, and yet I don't know. So should we ordinance against that? No, I don't think we should. But what if the supervisors want to? What if the supervisors say you can't do that, and it has to be 3,280 feet from a property line because maybe I don't want to hear that on my property? Well, you can make the argument that that's agricultural, but then we come back to what's agricultural. So I get it that people don't want to call this a wind farm because it's not farming. So you use an industrialized equipment, i.e. the fan, to harvest a natural thing, wind, to provide a commodity that we all use. So we use industrialized tractors and combines. We don't use horses anymore, right? To harvest stuff from the land, whether it's wind or nutrients from that, to provide a commodity that we use in various things. So depending on how you want to look at it, I've said that a few times to people, and they're like, "Oh, come on, that doesn't make any sense." Okay, but depending on how you want to look at it, it does. That is literally using industrialized equipment to harvest wind, which is natural substance, to provide a commodity that we all want and need. Right? I think most everybody uses electricity, and I think it's funny that I know several landowners that have, in the past, had people come up to complain to them when they were putting on these communication towers on their land. They didn't want those. And yet they're all over the place. We see them all over our landscape with flashing red lights. But we want our cell phones now, so I don't think anyone's opposed to them now, but they sure were when they came in. Right? Where are the harmful effects of that? Now we've got all these waves running through places. What's the harmful effects of that?
And we're still
I don't know. I mean,
and who knows what the harmful effects is by me having this iPhone that I'm recording you on so close to my head or anywhere else.
I think they talked about flip phones for a while, potentially having more problems, but I don't know.
Well, Bryan, we are at what I will call 49 minutes and 15 seconds of podcast excellence. And at this point, I think we've shared a lot of information, a lot of good. I think you've very eloquently presented your points and your thoughts as a landowner in Henry County. Is there one other thing that you would like to mention before we wrap up?
Well, I guess there's kind of several points that I was hoping to get to, but that's okay if we don't.
All right,
let me just look at a couple just to see. I kind of guess I got on some of those. I guess the main thing that here's one I kind of want to discuss before I close, if you're okay, about another 5 minutes or so.
Yeah.
I've heard the talk about the character of the county. Like, we don't want the character of the county to change. And I think it's interesting right now with the school board system coming right now, where they're going to have an election on May 13th for a school board member here in Mount Pleasant. And soon they're going to be proposing a bonding issue of, I think, 25 million plus. I'm not sure exactly the amount.
I've heard numbers of 35 to 40.
So let's say it's somewhere in that range. That's a lot of range to do what? To bring the schools up to modern standards. So from what I hear in the county, we should keep everything in this nice, lifestyle that I guess someone was thinking of in the past as a kid. But that could be arbitrary. Like I said, is that with horses and buggy before there was anything? And windmills actually provided the first electricity on the farms before it was electrified. I thought that was kind of interesting. Is that the character we're talking about, or what are we talking about? So let's if we're going to modernize things, and then it's not a lot. I think in a Board of Supervisors meeting over a year ago, they had some tax experts and thought that Mount Pleasant would get about $95,000 new money, because there's some money goes to the state and it doesn't come back, so that new money would be $95,000 a year. Not a lot, but still over 30 some years, you're talking $3 million of that bond. Winfield, I think, is going to be doing a bond too, or at least they're trying to. They actually get more for their school systems than $95,000 a year. So the character of the county, we talked about Walmart already. The water towers have changed. 4-lane roads have come in. And if anyone knows the history of Mount Pleasant and how Ernie Hayes got the Avenue of the Saints coming through, that's why Walmart is here. And I understand that some of that was built before the 4-lane expansion, but it was backdoor talks and deals that they knew the 4-lane was coming through. So that's, you could say, advancement. I don't know how you want to look at it, but right now I think a lot of people are happy with that tax revenue, and not too upset of the ground that we're not farming there. Security lights, the glow lights, a lot more confinements, grain bins. The rural schools and churches are closing. The school I went to from K through 5 is closed and is no longer there. I know of several churches that have closed. Like, things are changing, and if we want to maintain a county viability and not die like a lot of rural counties are, we got to have a promotion of business and tax base. And I want to talk briefly about the county roads. Like, there's a great article talking about Henry County pays an average of $168 per citizen for county roads, whereas Johnson County, who has way more paved roads, pays $47 per citizen. And why is it? Because they have the tax base. We don't. And so that burden's going to go up and up and up. So let's just think about things like that while providing a fair economic environment for everything to thrive. When you asked about the research, from what I can see on the double-blinded research, I'm not too concerned about health stuff, as it seems to be mostly predisposed ideas. So that's where I like people to look at from that standpoint. I don't know if that's a concise closing.
That was a very concise closing. And see, I told you
Right.
I'd be the one who'd mess up on
Right.
talking, so you didn't have. You did I think we had a great conversation. Would like to have you come back on the podcast sometime, and hopefully you feel that I was fair to you, and well, hopefully a lot of people will see this.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, it's the one thing I tried to say in one of the public things is when we look at like right here, the fundamental principles of the Republican platform, these are the principles. So really look at that and look at, even if you don't like wind and even if you don't like solar, and that's fine. I'm not, like I said, I'm not a big proponent of it, but let's look at these principles and see if that's something that, if you can justify it, then great. That's great. But for me, that's a difficult thing to do. So.
Gotcha. Well, I think you explained it well. Bryan, thank you, sir, for being on, and I wish you the best.
Oh, one last thing,
right.
And I do appreciate it. I'm sorry. I want to make clear that I applaud people that use their voice. We do have a freedom of speech. I disagree with several, but I still applaud people that are using their voice in the public meetings. That being said, I disagree with it, but I still applaud it.
Well, that's I'm sure that'll be appreciated, and I'm sure they appreciate the fact that you do as well. And hey, that's what my goal is here with this podcast, and I'm glad that you got to participate here today.
Very good. Thank you.
I want to thank Bryan Messer for being on the podcast today. And whatever you think, whichever side of the coin you're on and the topics, I think we had a very good discussion. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did having the conversation with Bryan. If so, make sure to give this episode a like and follow and subscribe. It's free. Once again, thanks to Bryan for being on. Thank you for watching. And I want to thank my sponsors, Griner Auto Body, Car Doctor, McDonald Boneyard, Your Choice Family Restaurant, Girling Repair, B&B Propane, and the family of Jet Stops, Dutch Market, and Coffee Talk. I'm your host, John Bain. Stay friendly, Southeast Iowa.